I was at the Hilton Hotel in downtown Albany, not far from the Capitol building. It was about 9 o'clock on a Thursday night, and I was there not as a guest, but looking for my wife. She was there with her boyfriend. She didn't know that I knew she had a boyfriend, but I did. I had known this for some time, and it had been gnawing at me, a little bit every day, and I was going to do something about it. I thought long and hard about what I was going to do. A man can only take what he can take. For months, I looked the other way, hoping her affair would end. But it didn't. Diane continued her affair with Darren Ranger while pretending to be a faithful and caring wife to me. We talked about our future plans and what we wanted to do. It was all bullshit. She didn't mean any of it. And then I was trying to figure out what I had done that made her leave for another man and want to have sex with him. Obviously, I'd missed something. Obviously, I wasn't doing it for her anymore. At least not in the quantity or as often as she wanted. I tried to think of ways to let her have fun for now, and then get her back to being a faithful wife. But it was all just nonsense on my part. Once she got a taste for other men, it would be hard for her to come back to me. I waited for months, but she gave no sign that she was going to change her views. Then I decided it was best to just end it. I have to admit that it took me a while to come to terms with that decision. I work very long hours, often 18 hours a day for several days in a row. Was this the reason my wife turned her attention to another man to fulfill her needs? Was I unconsciously ignoring her? I didn't think so, but obviously something was wrong. But if I wasn't meeting her needs, why not talk to me about it? Why not just say, I need to move on, and be done with it? Why have a boyfriend behind my back and yet say useless things like, I love you to my face? Why not do the mature thing and tell me you want to break up and get a divorce? Too many questions and not enough answers. So I came up with a plan. Maybe not a perfect one, but one I could live with. I wasn't at the hotel to be violent. Hell, it wasn't worth it at that point. I wasn't going to do something stupid and beat the crap out of her boyfriend. No, my lawyer had warned me against it and told me it would end badly. I'd end up in jail and get a criminal record. No, I was there to end it. To put her out of her misery and maybe give her a few minutes to suffer. You want to know a little bit about me, don't you? So my name is David Walters. I'm 31 years old. I was born and raised in the Albany area. And I work as a physician. I'm an emergency room physician and I work at the main hospital in the city. Or at least I used to practice. I have a mother, father, and brother, all of whom live nearby. I also have a wife. I recently applied for a leave of absence to recuperate. I'm burned out. I admit it. I haven't told my wife about it because she doesn't care. My own doctor advised me to do it so I could recover properly and not die of stress early. I've been burning the proverbial candle at both ends and sometimes in the middle. I desperately need rest. After finding out that my wife was having fun with other men, I finally decided to take a break. My wife's name is Diane Walters, Annie Stapleton. She's 30 years old, and she works for a national bank in the city. We live in a nice 2-bedroom apartment not far from the hospital, and we don't have children. Thank goodness for that. Diane is about 5 feet 8 inches tall, has long, thick brunette hair that comes down below her shoulders, and is very good looking. She attracts the attention of men very easily, too easily. She's easy to look at. We met at university. I liked her from the beginning. I met her in an English class I was taking in my sophomore year. Science students had to be able not only to read technical literature, but also to understand it. My main focus in that class was Diane. I asked her out and, as they say, the rest was history. Until now. After university, Diane and I lived together for almost 2 years and married right out of medical school. I managed to graduate without the massive debt that most medical students face. I was financed by my mom and dad's bank. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Poor little rich kid complaining and crying about his great misfortune. That's a load of crap. While I was in school, I worked damn hard every summer to earn as much as I could. My family helped me out by making me promise to pay off my parents when I graduated high school and started making money. Now my family is living well. My father has a construction and contracting business, and he is doing very well. He has over 100 employees and a whole warehouse of materials and equipment that he uses in his business. I worked for him as a laborer during the summer, earning minimum wage to pay for school for the next year. So I know a thing or two about hard work. Now I work 18-hour shifts at the hospital and I'm on call on my off days. But you don't care about that, do you? Man. You want to know what's going on with my wife at the Hilton. You want to know what I'm going to do with her. Well, that's about to happen. I told you I've known she had a boyfriend for a long time. Why haven't I done anything about it yet? Well, that's a fair question. I have to say that I went through several stages of experiencing the loss of my marriage before I decided what to do. Yes, at first I was stunned to realize that Diane was cheating on me. After all, I thought we were a team. I thought we had the same desires, aspirations, and plans. And then I found out she was dating this Darren guy. What the hell? We talked about starting a family. We talked about what kind of kids we wanted. We even started thinking about names for them. Names for boys and girls. And we even looked at houses in the suburbs, for crying out loud. We talked about her taking maternity leave at work once we had a baby in our family. We discussed the pros and cons of her becoming a stay-at-home mom and taking full care of the kids. Her own mother did the same for her, her brother, and sister. We had already opened a savings account to put a down payment on the house and pay for baby expenses. My salary at the hospital was growing rapidly. Last year, they paid me $120,000. I paid my taxes and paid my parents back almost $10,000. Diane was paid well at the bank and was making about $80,000. We were in great financial shape, and my job as an ER doctor offered great earning potential. I would likely be making almost $600,000 a year in 5 years. We shared dreams. We made plans. We told each other every day that we loved the other person. I loved my wife, and she loved me. At least I thought she loved me. Not so much anymore. What happened? I found out about Diane's affair by accident. An emergency room nurse was at a restaurant downtown on a date with her husband. She had met Diane the year before at a Christmas party at the hospital, and being good with faces and names, remembered that she was my wife. She also recognized the guy she was with. We'll come back to him later. I watched as Diane and her boyfriend walked through the hotel lobby and headed for the elevators. They entered one of them and he turned to press the button for the floor he was renting a room on. I watched as the indicator above the elevator stopped at the number 12. I sat down, looked at my watch, and considered my plan one more time. In my hind mind, I knew that this was exactly what I needed to do to make things right in my life. I can only tolerate so much disrespect, and today, I'm going to right this little injustice. Today, I'm going to stir the pot. We'll see what happens. I walked up to the front desk and asked to be called to the room occupied by Mr. Darren Ranger. Mr. Ranger is the owner of a local business that does landscaping and property maintenance. Mr. Ranger lives very well for himself, his wife, and 2 sons. So well, in fact, that he has found it necessary to have an affair with the loan officer of the bank with which he does business. That loan officer turned out to be my wife. Darren and Diane enjoyed each other's attentions for almost 2 full years. Yes, I couldn't believe it when I found out the extent of her infidelity. I found out quite by accident when one of the nurses in the emergency room was working the same shift as me and happened to mention that she had seen Diane and her friend Darren at a restaurant downtown. The nurse had been there with her husband and friends the previous weekend. That same weekend, I was working an 18-hour shift to deal with the shootings and stabbings we see all too often when alcohol are in full swing. She knew Darren because his company did a backyard retaining wall for her husband. There you go. So the cat was let out of the bag. When I was home a few days later, I mentioned to Diane in passing that Rhonda had spotted her at a restaurant last week with a friend. I didn't mention that I knew it was Darren's restaurant, but I asked about the menu and the quality of the food, and maybe we should go there sometime. The pale expression on Diane's face quickly recovered, and she said, "That's fine," and left it at that. The next week I did a few things. I talked to my father about what I could or should do if I suspected my wife of infidelity. He was shocked that Diane could do something like that. I know he really liked her and expected us to have children soon. From our conversation, I deduced a basic plan of action to protect myself. We had a long heart-to-heart talk, and at the end, we agreed that he would not share information with my mother. I went to my supervisor at the hospital and shared the information with her as well. She agreed that I needed a vacation to deal with my crap. She was familiar with my wife, and I could tell by the look on her face that she was disappointed that Diane might have done something like this, but she also realized that it happened all too often. We agreed that I could take a 3-month vacation and then we would review my work assignment. I even met with the in-house psychiatrist to talk with him, and she agreed that the stress of my family situation required some time to recuperate. My next assignment was to contact the investigative agency and find out what Diane had been up to. It only took them a week to dig, and they had a clear picture of what she and Mr. Ranger had been doing, where and for how long. The hotels kept records, and for a reasonable monetary fee paid to a willing clerk, those records were available to anyone who wanted them. Not that there was much of a statewide law about the confidentiality of hotel records. A $100 bill, handed to the porter and known to the investigator, led to a history of Mr. Ranger's business at the hotel for the past 2 years. It appeared that he had rented a room there almost every week regularly, like clockwork, and almost always with the same woman. The clerk recognized the woman in the photograph as the one who had accompanied Mr. Ranger. The woman in the photograph was named Diane. The next thing I did was go to the bank, interestingly enough, not the bank where my wife worked, and withdraw all the money I could without closing the account. I have my own credit card, so I didn't have to do anything. So, armed with the knowledge that my loving wife is a cheating bitch, I decided it was time to do something about it. I knew that Diane would meet her boyfriend after work, have dinner, and spend a few hours in a hotel room. She thought I had a long shift in the emergency room that day and night. He needed to get home to his family so he wouldn't have to stay up late. That morning, as soon as she left for work, I packed up all the things I planned to take with me and then went down to the garage and started loading the bike. I loaded a few things into my car, my trusty Subaru Outback, and asked my dad to pick it up later that day and leave it at his house. I wasn't taking much, but I had everything I figured I would need for the next few months on the road. The rest of the day was spent sorting out the little things I wanted to take or get rid of. It was a strange day. It felt like there was a death in my family. It was actually the death of my marriage. My motorcycle is a 2016 Honda Africa Twin, equipped with luggage racks, fog lights, heated grips, navigation system, crash bar, and a few other items that make it perfect for long-distance riding. All I needed to bring with me was a few changes of clothes, a toothbrush, rain gear, and an iPad. I planned to stay off the freeways and see the countryside. I decided that I would stay overnight in small budget hotels, motels, bed and breakfasts, and eat at local establishments off the beaten path. From time to time, I will make rest stops in places where there is plenty to see and do. My dad always told me that change is sometimes as good as rest. Well, if ever there was a time for change, this was that time. My plan was to do one lap around North America. I plotted a route along the New England coast to Maine, then into Canada, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia, then a ferry to Newfoundland with a landing in Port aux Basques. I would tour the island and leave via Argentia, and then return via New Brunswick to Quebec, Ontario, and then west through the prairies and Rocky Mountains to British Columbia. From British Columbia, I planned to take the coastal highway south to San Diego, then drive through the mountains to the Midwest and return through the Midwest to Albany. I figured it would take me 3 months, maybe 4, and by then, I would be able to exercise my demons enough to move on with my life and get back to work. I seriously considered taking a job with Doctors Without Borders for a year or two, just for a change of scenery. I figured there had to be better places to do good work than the emergency room in Albany on a Saturday night. The GSW and the stabbings were starting to get tiresome. One can only tolerate so much stupidity. Right now, everything came first. I had a cheating wife to deal with. I went to the counter and asked to be connected to Darren Ranger. The clerk picked up the phone and dialed his number. After a few rings, he answered. I took the phone from the clerk. I exhaled. May I speak to Diane Walters, please? He hesitated. Ah, there's no one here by that name. You must have the wrong number. Just tell her there's been a death in her family. What, shit? I continued, raising my voice. Just tell her that her husband died. He died today. Tell her David Walters died today. There was no voice in the receiver, but I could hear noise in the background and muffled speech. I repeated, raising my voice a little. Just tell her husband died. And then hung up. When I handed her the phone receiver, the receptionist looked at me wide-eyed. I looked at her, smiled, and thanked her, then turned and walked out of the hotel. My motorcycle was parked out front. I put on my gear and helmet and waited a few minutes. Diana ran out of the hotel into the street. It was dark enough that she didn't see me or the motorcycle as she hurried out of there. She quickly got into a cab. I figured she was headed to our apartment. Now to her apartment. I, on the other hand, was heading for freedom. Diana. Oh my God. Someone had called and told Darren that David was dead. What the hell? I needed to get home right away. I got dressed as fast as I could and ran for the elevator. A few seconds later, I was on the street and took a cab home. I got to the apartment building and ran inside. The elevator took forever to get to our floor. As soon as the doors started to open, I ran down the hallway and struggled to put the key in the lock. I ran inside and called out to David's. I searched all the rooms, but he wasn't there. I sat down at the table to catch my breath and felt my heart pounding. I rummaged through my bag for a cell phone to call his father. And then I saw an envelope on the table. My name was printed on the front. I picked it up and opened it. It contained a single piece of paper and David's wedding ring. Shit. He knows. I unfolded the paper and read, Diana, you can consider me dead. Our marriage has been dead for a long time by the looks of it, and that's why I left. I took what I wanted. The rest is yours, and you can do whatever you want with it. I have notified the management company that I will no longer be living here, so you can decide if you want to stay here or move. The choice is yours. Don't look for me. I'm on my way to take a break from work, life, and your fun with Darren Ranger. It is clear to me that you are no longer interested in being married to me. Enjoy your life, and I wish you the best. David. One last thing. My attorney will be contacting you shortly with information that you may or may not use. This is your choice as well. Oh, shit. What am I going to do now? I never thought David would find out about Darren. Oh, damn it. Shit. There was nothing serious about my relationship with Darren. It was just fun. David works a monstrous amount of hours, and even when we do get to spend time together, it seems like a lot of things get in the way of our intimacy. To be honest, I really wanted a man's touch. I knew that David would slow down at work, and when we had a predictable schedule, we would pick ourselves up and be just like every other married couple. I thought that eventually we would have a couple of kids, buy a house, and become a normal family. That plan went to hell. Darren is a very charming guy, and it was easy to fall in love with him. The more I thought about him, the easier it was to imagine that I could have him once or twice a week, and it wouldn't interfere with my marriage. I tried to call David on his cell phone, but found that his number was no longer in service. I called his mother and father and pounced on them. His father refused to talk to me, saying only that David was gone, and I could go to hell. I looked around the apartment one more time and saw that most of David's things were gone. The furniture was still there, but I noticed that his closet was empty. A few books from the shelf in the spare bedroom were gone, and there were a couple of black garbage bags in the kitchen. Opening them, I saw that they were David's things that he had obviously decided he didn't need. I had no idea what to do. I sat at my desk, and it felt like my life had evaporated before my eyes. I had screwed up big time. I decided I would go to his family tomorrow and try to figure out what I had gotten myself into. I tried calling a few of his friends but got nowhere. All they could tell me was that they thought he was busy at the hospital and that they hadn't seen him in weeks. No one at his brother's house answered, and I didn't have any of their cell phone numbers. Shit. I went to the refrigerator, found a half bottle of wine, and poured it into a glass. I sat at the table, looking at the note and my husband's wedding ring, thinking about how stupid I was and trying to think of a way to fix this. Whatever the fix was, it wouldn't come without pain on my part. I screwed up big time. David. That first night, I didn't get very far that night. It was almost 10 p.m. when I saw my wife run out of the Hilton Hotel and into a cab. She thought I was at work in the emergency room and would be there until tomorrow. She figured she'd have plenty of time to spend with her boyfriend and then go home and get cleaned up. I engaged the starter and the bike immediately came to life. The Africa Twin is a DCT. That means it has a programmable 6-speed automatic transmission. It also means that the motorcyclist gets much less tired on long rides. The 1000cc bike is a beast. It can go for days at high speed and carry me and all my gear. I have no death wish, so I am always very cautious when I ride, looking at everything around me and anticipating what cars and trucks will do. Situational awareness is very important for safe riding. I've seen a lot of kids brought to the emergency room who went too fast on crotch rockets and generally weren't good riders in the first place. This usually leads to an accident. I've seen kids killed because of stupid actions on a motorcycle and many others permanently crippled. Not a pleasant ending. The destination was only a few minutes away. It was east of the river, at a Holiday Inn Express hotel just off the highway. I was exhausted physically and mentally. I wanted to eat, take a hot shower, and get a good night's sleep. I was checked into a room, and I realized that this was the hotel where my marriage ended. Now I was at the hotel where my new adventure was beginning. How appropriate. How ironic. Diane. Leaving the apartment early, I drove to David's parents' house and rang the doorbell. I noticed that David's car was parked in front of the garage, so maybe he was already here. Miriam, his mother, came to the door, and when she opened it and saw it was me, she immediately closed it in my face. I pressed the doorbell button again and waited. I kept pressing the button until a few minutes later the door opened, and this time it was John, David's father. He was just a wonderful man. "What the hell do you want?" "Please, John, I need to talk to David. Please, I need to see him. Ask him to come out." John frowned. "You're too late. He left Albany last night. I don't know where he is, and frankly, if I did, I wouldn't tell you." "John, I need to talk to him and explain everything. If he'll just listen to me, I know we can work this out." "What the hell? You've had a long affair with another man, and you expect your husband to just say, 'Oh, don't worry, honey, it's okay.' As if he would. Get your cheating ass off the doorstep, and we don't want to see you here anymore." With those words, he slammed the door shut. I sat on the step for a few minutes trying to figure out what to do. I rang the doorbell again. I kept ringing until John opened it. Before he could say anything, I whispered, "Please, give him a message from me. Tell him I really want to talk to him. Just ask him to call me. Please?" I turned and walked back to the car and sat for a few minutes, hoping John would tell me how to contact David or, if he was in the house, come out. But he didn't. He closed the door, and that was the end of it. Nothing more. Back at the apartment, I found a letter taped to the door. It was a letter from David's attorney, Leanne Collins, informing me that I had been removed from David's health insurance policy, all financial assets had been divided equally, and David's share had been withdrawn from all bank accounts. In addition, the life insurance policies had been amended so that the beneficiaries were now his parents. The letter also advised that David Walters did not wish to have any further contact with Diane Walters, and therefore, any correspondence that Diane Walters may wish to send to David Walters should be in writing and sent to his attorney. Any correspondence would be held until David Walters indicated that he wished to receive it. The letter went on to state that under New York State family law, Diane Walters has the right to bring an action for dissolution of marriage based on abandonment after 1 year, which is 365 days from this date. If Diane Walters wishes to file for dissolution of marriage at any time, have her representative contact Leanne Collins. Any necessary motions or pleadings on behalf of David Walters will be filed at that time. Have a good day. So it became clear that my husband was done. We had been together for almost 8 years, married for almost 4 of those years, and that was the end of it. I had already pooped in my own bed, and now I was going to have to lie in it. I spent the entire weekend trying to reach David's brother, his friends, his coworkers at the hospital. I even went to the hospital to try to find someone there who could tell me where David might be. I met an emergency room nurse there. Her name is Rhonda. She told me that she couldn't talk to me because she was very busy, but I could come see her the next day and we could talk. I thanked her and left. The next day, I went to the address she gave me and she actually let me in to talk. She offered me a drink. I asked for ice water. I needed to clear my head. She told me that she had shared with David that she had seen me at the restaurant with Darren. He was interested in learning more about this Darren guy, she said. Rhonda said she told him everything she knew about him, which wasn't much, but he was married, had a family, and his company did landscaping in her backyard. There wasn't much more to tell. She looked at me with a mixture of amazement and pity. I'm sure she thought I was a stupid idiot who had ruined her marriage to a married man, no less. As we talked, her children ran around the kitchen. She shouted at them every now and then and returned her attention to me. After asking a few more questions, I thanked her for her time and got up to leave. As I was walking out the door, she mentioned that it was widely known in the hospital that David would not be returning to work for some time. She stared after me as I got in my car and drove away. A month later, David. Newfoundland is a beautiful province. It has majestic scenery and very nice people. I was on the island for over a week, traveled many roads, and really enjoyed the scenery, the people, and the food. When I got to the Avalon Peninsula, I encountered a moose that decided to come out onto the road to see who I was. I managed to avoid the giant and stopped to watch him for a few minutes while he decided that maybe the road wasn't the right place for him. Good for him, and good for any unlucky motorist who might have run into him. I had been warned that there were a lot of moose along the highway, so I only drove during the day. In a place called Petty Harbor, I was eating ice cream after visiting the easternmost part of North America, Cape Spear, and I got a flat tire on my bike. 4 people offered to help me. You don't see that in Albany. I called the auto club CAA in Canada, and they sent a truck to load my bike on it and take it to a repair shop. The repair shop was in St. John's, a fairly large city with a good selection of places to stay and great restaurants. I got a room in a small hotel downtown and went for a walk around town while my bike was being repaired and tuned up. It was a good place to take a break from riding, do some laundry, and re-energize. The hotel room was clean and comfortable, and it even had a small bar and restaurant. I stopped by the motorcycle repair shop again to have them do a modification for me, and there I happened to meet a woman who was also traveling across the country on a motorcycle. She was originally from Germany and was on her way to Morocco. She had traveled through Canada and was now heading to Africa to begin her journey across the continent. She was preparing her motorcycle for shipment from St. John's in a shipping container. She was to fly to Casablanca via Lisbon and pick up the motorcycle as soon as she arrived. It was to take about a week to get the motorcycle to Morocco. Her name was Emma Fisher. She was originally from Berlin and worked for a travel company. She was dressed in riding gear, and while it wasn't the most flattering outfit, I immediately knew she was gorgeous. In my opinion, she was about 35 years old and about the same height as me. My height is 5'10", and I'm standing barefoot. She looks like that British actress who stars in the Mission Impossible movies, only with a sexy German accent. After talking some more about traveling by motorcycle and some of the things she encountered on her trip across Canada, I asked when she was leaving, and it turns out it's only in 3 days. Then I invited her to dinner. She said yes. We were staying in hotels fairly close to each other and agreed to meet at a restaurant called the Salty Cod. Wow, an establishment with that name in Newfoundland. We ate, drank, got to know each other, and the next morning I woke up in my hotel bed with a hand on my chest and a mane of dark hair spread across the pillows. She was gorgeous. I felt, well, it's hard to find the words to convey how good I felt. It was the best night I'd had in a while. For the first time in a long time, I felt good. We spent the next day together, talking a lot about traveling and how exciting it was to travel the world on a motorcycle. Her smile, voice, and eyes drew me in. I was immediately drawn to her. I got an erection at the mere sight of her. I was overcome with lust. After I shared my story with her and she shared hers, we talked about what each of us had planned for the next few months. My plans, of course, included driving across North America. She had already driven almost 40,000 kilometers and planned to drive another 20,000 before heading home to Germany. Her plan was to drive around the coast of Africa. I thought it would be a much more interesting trip than the one I had planned. All the next day, while I spent time with Emma, I thought about the pros and cons of changing my plan. I even called my dad and told him that I was thinking about going to Africa. I figured he might think I was crazy if I just texted him and my mom that I was going to Africa and would see them later. We talked for almost an hour. At the end of the conversation, both he and Mom said that I should do whatever I want. This is my life and I should make my own decisions about the path it will take. When I was a kid, my dad told me that fathers are where their children's dreams go to die. I didn't realize this until I grew up. And then I always thought it was a humorous but sadly realistic phrase my father used to say to me and my brother. Yes, I have a brother. He's 2 years older than me, married, and has 3 kids. He works with my dad at a construction company. Paul loves to build. He works very hard for his family, and his wife respects him for his hard work. Marcy quit her job to raise her children at home, and I have to tell you, it has paid off for them. She is a wonderful mother, and my parents love her to death. Their kids are spoiled by their grandparents. But I digress. Let's get back to my plan. The next evening, I asked Emma if she would like some company on her trip to Africa. I didn't know if she had a boyfriend, husband, or soulmate she was going to meet, but I decided to play around a bit and asked anyway. Whoever dared would win. She looked at me with a smile and asked, "You mean you want to come to Africa?" She bluntly said, "Yes, I do." "What happened to your plan to travel around North America?" "Well, you've opened my eyes a bit, and I think Africa might be a more interesting place to visit. It's a little out of my comfort zone, but I think I need to challenge myself and see what happens. Maybe I'll do well, or maybe it will be terrible. Right now, I don't really know. But I think I'd like to find out. I'm still too close to Albany. I need some distance from my old life." "You have an immediate problem. Your bike is here and needs to get to Africa." I quickly called the store and asked if there was room in the shipping container for another motorcycle. The store owner called me back an hour later and said that if I could come over now and sign some paperwork, he could ship my motorcycle the next morning. The logistics of shipping a motorcycle are pretty simple, but all it takes is enough money. 2 days later, I boarded a flight from St. John's to Toronto with Emma. From there, we flew to Paris and then, after a short wait, to Lisbon and Casablanca. Emma Fisher. When David talked about wanting to join me on the Africa portion of my trip, I decided I needed to find out more about him before agreeing. I made a couple calls to a friend from the office I work in back home in Berlin. Her husband works for the German police, and she asked if he could make some inquiries about one David Walters from Albany, New York, and confirm that what he had told me about himself was true. My friend called me back very quickly and informed me that he was, as they say, real. He worked as a physician in the emergency room at Albany General Hospital and was on sabbatical for 3 months with a possible extension to 6 months. He comes from a prominent family in Albany and is currently divorced from his wife of nearly 4 years. As it turns out, she was having an affair with a married man. He graduated from medical school among the top of his class and has no children. It's amazing what the police can dig up without much effort. I even got a picture of him to make sure it was indeed the David Walters I was asking about. It was him, for sure. Withholding that information, I was glad I was traveling with David. That he was a doctor was good to know in case we had an accident and needed medical attention. But at the same time, I knew he must be suffering greatly from his wife's infidelity since he was going away for such a long period of time and traveling alone. I had a long-term partner, a man, and I can tell you that a cheating partner is not something that can be tolerated for long. I ended my relationship by throwing all his stuff on the balcony of our apartment. He got the message. I can tell you that traveling alone is different. You can go wherever you want and whenever you want, but it can also be lonely. I have been on this journey for a few months now and have traveled over 30,000 kilometers. I plan to write a book about motorcycle travel from the perspective of a woman traveling alone. I have photographed and videotaped every part of this journey and kept a detailed written diary, and it will probably take me a few months to edit it all and make it into something I can sell. It might be fun for me to do all that, but it has to be interesting enough that others will pay money to read about my adventures. I have a friend back home who suggests I put some of my videos online, perhaps on YouTube or some other social network. David has a lot to learn about hardcore long-distance motorcycle travel, and the first task is to outfit him with the best gear he has. I called the motorcycle store in Casablanca, and they have almost everything he needs. And they know of other stores and outfitters in the area that can provide more things he'll need. It'll be interesting to travel with Dr. David. I hope I can be a good tour guide. Diane. David's mother and father have made it clear that they want nothing more to do with me. They refuse to talk to me and won't tell me where David is. I don't know what to do about my marriage. It's becoming obvious that it's over between David and I, so what should I do? He hasn't started the divorce yet, and I'm not sure if I want to be the first to file for divorce. What if he comes back and changes his mind and wants to try to repair our marriage? What will I do if he gives me another chance? What will I do then? Would he be able to trust me again? I felt very alone after Darren told me we couldn't see each other anymore. His wife was beginning to suspect something, and he was afraid she might have hired an investigator to get evidence of his affair with me, which she could use to punish him in the divorce. So that was over and done with. Besides, he was afraid that David might have told his wife about having fun with me. My social life is very modest, it's almost non-existent. But I can't do this anymore. I need to get out of the house. I need to see people and socialize. People at work often meet on Fridays after work. I'm going to start walking with them. The walls of the apartment are starting to tire me out. I really need a change of scenery. David. Casablanca is an amazing place. Casablanca, Arabic for Al-Dar al-Baida, or Dar al-Baida, is Morocco's main port on the North African Atlantic coast. The city is home to about 4 million people and is an interesting mix of very old and very new and modern. I got us an inexpensive hotel room to stay in while we waited for the ship to arrive with our bikes. Emma took me to a few places to buy the gear we needed, and we played tourist as we walked around the town, eating food and learning about the history and culture. We learned that the ship was delayed 2 days due to bad weather in the Atlantic, and we ended up staying in Casablanca for 8 nights. Some of those nights were the best nights of my life. Others kept up. Diana. Almost 2 months and no word from David. I need to start thinking about what to do. It looks like he's serious about getting rid of me. What did I do that was so wrong? I mean, he's never been there for me. This damn hospital was the only thing he cared about. He had me all to himself, and he had to take care of my needs too. I love him, but with his schedule and my schedule, we had very little time together. I have needs too. Yesterday, Darren stopped by the bank to see me. He thinks his wife is no longer suspicious of what he does when he is out of the office and we can start seeing each other again. When I told him that my husband left me, he only replied that we could save on hotel bills by using my apartment. I need a man to come inside me again or I will go crazy. I was hoping it would be David, but without him, I'll have to settle for Darren. Damn it, David. I can't believe the beauty of Morocco. I also can't believe the beauty of Emma. The more I learn about her, the more I like her. Not only is she physically beautiful, but she is also very smart, resourceful, drives a motorcycle beautifully, has tons of common sense, and is not afraid to use it. She taught me a lot about real adventure riding. She told me that she has a longtime boyfriend, referred to at home as a common-law husband, and she has no children. Her boyfriend decided he wanted to live with another woman, and in a very correct manner announced that their relationship was over. She threw his crap over the railing of the apartment balcony and moved on with her life. In Casablanca, I bought a bunch of new equipment necessary to survive in these conditions. I now have a supply of gasoline and oil for my motorcycle, plenty of water for me, tools for repairs like fixing a flat tire or a broken chain. My bike has metal covers on the underside of the engine and extra LED headlights. I also have a battery and cables for recharging since none of our bikes have a Kickstarter. I have a new GPS system that detects even off-road routes and connects via satellites rather than cell phone signals. I have the best riding gear, a sleeping bag, and an inflatable pillow to sleep on for those nights when we stay at campgrounds away from towns and villages. I also have a small gas stove to heat water and food. I can even make coffee, which is very important. We plan to stay in small hotels and eat local food as often as possible. This proved to be interesting when we traveled to Morocco. My North American gut wasn't quite ready for the change in diet, and for the first few days I had to stay close to the toilet. Emma was very amused by this, as she was used to eating in all sorts of places. I bought some tablets to help ease my bowel movements. My medical school training took its toll, and I remembered that dehydration is not your friend. I drank more water and all was well. I received a letter from my attorney to let me know that nothing was going on with Diane. She has been quiet and hasn't tried to send me anything. I think she realized it was over between us, or was trying to figure out what her options were and what she was going to do. I didn't care at all what she was doing. All I knew was that what I was doing now was what I wanted. I didn't want a wife who wanted to spend time with another man. Hell, if she wanted another guy, why not just tell me that, and we could go our separate ways? But no, she couldn't be honest with me. She was supposed to be having fun with that landscape guy. She had to pretend she still cared about me. What a load of crap that was. After leaving Casablanca, we drove south towards Marrakesh. It's about 250 kilometers on the main highway, the A3. But we decided to take a more indirect route through the port city of El Hadida. It was a hot day, but it was a great ride, and we enjoyed taking the less direct roads. The town of El Jadida was very beautiful. We spent one night there and then traveled to El Badouza, a town on the coast. Because it is so close to the water, the temperature was a little cooler than inland, so I was able to acclimatize to the area. Emma had never been here before, so we were both able to discover the region. Emma knows several languages: German, English, French, Spanish, and a little bit of Arabic. In the short time we were in North Africa, she managed to use them all. God, I love her German accent. It's sexy as hell. The journey from Casablanca to Marrakesh took us 5 days and over 1,300 kilometers. It was, without a doubt, the best trip of my life. Safi and Essaouira were on our itinerary, and then we traveled east, inland, to the big city. Marrakesh is a city of about 1 million people. It is an amazing place that again combines the old and the new. Since neither of us had been there, I convinced Emma that we should stay for 3 days and play tourist. So we did. I managed to find an inexpensive hotel in town that had secure parking for our bikes. I didn't want them stripped of everything or stolen. We checked the bikes every day and everything was fine. Emma rode a BMW F800 GS, and it was equipped with everything BMW could think of to make long-distance travel easier. Perhaps I'll tell you more about that later, but for now, the Africa Twin has been doing great here in Africa. Diana, it's been over 2 months now, and I still haven't heard from David or anyone I know. I tried several more times to talk to his family, but each time the door was slammed in my face. I called his attorney, but all she asked was if I was starting divorce proceedings or if I had a letter I wanted him to receive at some point. I didn't write a letter, and what the hell was I supposed to put in it? I wasn't going to get a divorce yet. I still wanted to talk to David and see if he was okay with staying married to me. After all, he's a great husband, and I know he'll be a great father when we have kids. If we have kids. But right now, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. And that I've had several different guys in my apartment for one night. Does that make me a bad person? Probably yes and probably no. After all, my husband left me and went God knows where. No call, no text, no email. To let me know what he's doing and when he'll be back. It would be nice to hear from him. David, Africa is so different from anything I grew up with. The culture, the language, the terrain, the food, the weather, everything. But at the same time, it's remarkably similar to home. The people here are pretty much the same. People want to take care of their families and homes. They want to make sure they have food on the table and a roof over their heads. Just basic survival. Parents want a better life for their children. They want peace and security. Not every country on this continent has a stable government whose goal is the welfare of the people. In Morocco, the situation is better than in many other countries. Traveling with Emma was very educational. She is a real woman with an extraordinary sense of adventure. She is clearly not happy unless she is challenged. On the other hand, I have to give up my own fears of different things, places, and environments. I grew up in fairly safe New York State, in a very stable family with a mother, father, and brother. I went to a good school and came home to a cozy and safe home. Not every family in the world can boast such luxury. One thing I realized after my vacation is that people all over the world depend on their families and friends and take pride in the place where they live, no matter how humble it may be. Africa is a learning experience. Traveling is an experience. My eyes are being opened in ways I never imagined. And I am experiencing it with a remarkable woman. Emma is a wonderful companion and lover. She is passionate, caring, wild, and loves living on the edge. But that doesn't mean she's stupid, just the opposite. She has a lot of common sense and she's not afraid to use it. I'm overcome with lust. Lust for Emma and traveling, lust for a new way of life. I don't think I can go back to the lifestyle I led in Albany. Emma Fisher. I am really enjoying being with Dr. David on this Africa trip. He is such a pleasure to be around. He is constantly amazed at the difference in things and life in Africa compared to his upbringing in the US. All his life he has tried so hard to do everything right. University, medical school, family, and wife. And it all led to disappointment in the person he thought would be with him forever. He thought his wife would support him in his profession and the choices they made together. But she lost her way somewhere. I don't know her, and my mission is not to take her husband away from her, but from the looks of it, she did a good job of leaving him. And alone. We've only been together a few weeks, but I can tell you that if things continue the way they are now, We're going to have a hard time separating when he has to go back to work at the hospital. I have a plan that I made before I started my adventure, and I need to see it through. I've arranged with a publisher back home to write a guidebook for women who want to see the world on a motorcycle. I doubt I'll make much money from it, but I love it. It's something I enjoy doing, and I think I'm good at it. David, we're traveling from Marrakesh to El Ayoun. It's about 900 kilometers, and we're driving mostly on the coastal route. There is almost nothing on the long stretches, just dust and wide open spaces. The beauty is breathtaking and awe-inspiring at the same time. A green-skinned person like me should respect the environment and pay attention to what's going on around us. My American passport does not give me any special rights here. A passport issued by an EU member country is well recognized here. Border guards are often perplexed as to why an American is in a place like this and riding around on a motorcycle getting dirty. One customs officer asked me why I left America and came here. I smiled and pointed to Emma. He laughed, nodding his head. He knows why men do that. On the way to El Ayoun, we camped for 2 nights. We made sure we were off the road and not an easy target for night thieves. I have to say that the first night I hardly slept at all. Every noise kept me awake and on high alert. On the second night, fatigue set in, and I started sleeping more. In the morning, after doing some ablutions and brewing coffee on the stove, I felt much better. Gasoline for the bike, water, and food were a priority for us, so we never passed a place to get gas and food. We always paid in cash and never put down more than what the gas and groceries cost. It's best not to make yourself a target. I don't mean to say that West Africa is a dangerous place, no more dangerous than some parts of the US. But it never hurts to be aware of your surroundings and realize that 2 people on expensive motorcycles probably have money, so they are immediately a target for a thief looking to make an easy buck. My gear protects me from falls, but it is no match for a gun or knife. I know full well the damage a tiny gun can do. I've seen it too many times in the emergency room back home. Great entertainment. The drive south through Western Sahara and Mauritania was unlike anything I've ever seen or experienced in my life. The landscape was like on the moon, I guess. It was dry, dusty, brutal, and beautiful all at the same time. As we drove, we were able to talk to each other through Bluetooth helmet communication devices. Emma kept telling me about the region as if she had lived here for years. She was the editor of a travel magazine and had researched the area well before leaving home. It was all amazing to me. I loved it, but at the same time I was scared to death. Scared because it was so foreign to my upbringing in white America. Did I mention that Emma talked nonstop? Her voice was mesmerizing. I could listen to this woman read the Berlin phone book. I swear I had a boner while I was riding my bike, all because of her voice. Our goal after leaving El Ayoun was to get to Dakar in Senegal. It was over 1,800 kilometers. That meant 4 days of pretty strenuous riding. I had managed to increase the distance, but now had to cover it in the heat and dust. Dust everywhere. Emma reminds me to drink water about 10 times a day. I have a Camelback flask that holds 4 liters of water, and I empty it every day plus more when we finish. A few times I've had to stop on the side of the road to empty my bladder, but it makes me laugh when Emma has to do the same. I tried to take a picture of her squatting to pee. It didn't work. She ran after me and snatched the phone out of my hands. I laughed so hard I had trouble breathing. I could tell you about traveling through Western Sahara and Mauritania, but that would be repeating the same thing 4 times. Lots of wide open spaces with absolutely nothing on them. I've mentioned before that we never once passed a place to buy gasoline. We both carried an extra 10 liters of fuel on our motorcycles, and a couple of times we had to use it. My bike is a little bigger in engine displacement, so it uses a little more gasoline than Emma's BMW. I'm going to buy an extra gas tank to attach to the bike. We had an accident and had to repair on the side of the road. It cost us about 3 hours, but that's the price you pay. We spent 3 nights in a tent, and it's just amazing how you can be intimate with a woman when you haven't had a chance to shower beforehand. The smell of human body odor, when it was hot and sweaty all day, I was already used to. Making love to Emma in a tiny tent in the desert after a few of those long days without water to take a bath was different. But it was still amazing. We didn't come close with our mouths to certain parts of each other's bodies, but our hands were close together. I know that sounds disgusting, but that's life. And sex. and maybe the beginning of love. We washed up a little water and soap on a washcloth to wash all the necessary body parts, and we used a cup of water each to brush our teeth. Cleanliness is, well, you get the picture. We crossed the Senegalese border at Diama. The crossing at Rosso is much more difficult, and to get to the other side of the river, you have to pay money to just about anyone who has anything to do with the crossing. We learned from other cyclists that there is a bridge in Diama and it is less expensive to cross. Not far from the bridge is the city of St. Louis. This is not the St. Louis you are likely familiar with. It's very different. I knew beforehand that the city is divided into different parts, some of which are on islands. When we arrived in the city, it looked like something I had only seen in movies. The poverty was astounding. However, as we drove over the bridge, we saw another part of the city that clearly had money. We found a nice and inexpensive hotel, Hotel de la Poste, secured our bikes and cleaned up. The hotel was next to a large government building, so there was always a police presence nearby. This meant that crime was much lower in the area. That was good for us. I told Emma that I needed some rest after crossing the desert. She laughed her infectious smile and agreed that we could both use a decent bed. We spent the next 2 days in that bed. At times we managed to get very little sleep. A few times we went out for meals and swam in the hotel pool. The hotel even has a laundry room, so we got our clothes in order. I know what you're thinking. A rich guy from the US can buy anything he wants in Africa. Well, most of the big houses in this part of St. Louis are owned by Senegalese, not Westerners, so park your outrage. Also, everything is a little cheaper in this part of the world than in the US. $50 a night for a nice hotel room that would cost $200 in the States is not uncommon. I usually checked my email when I had a good Wi-Fi connection. I wanted to see if my family had sent me anything and if my lawyer wanted to pass anything on to me. It was mostly my mom and dad asking where I was, if I was okay, and if I was having a good time. This time, the lawyer gave me an update. It seems Diane had written a letter asking where I was and when I would be back in Albany. I asked my parents not to reveal my whereabouts, and my attorney was under strict orders to do the same. She told me that Diane had not yet initiated any divorce action. I figured she would file for divorce soon. After all, she was the one who needed sex outside of our marriage, and she had already been having fun with her boyfriend for 2 years. 2 years. What I was doing now was none of her damn business. As far as I was concerned, it was over between us. It was over. I planned that if Diane didn't file for divorce before I got home from my trip, I would. I wanted to move on with my life. I was going through the best time of my life right now. Emma is a wonderful woman. I don't know what the future holds for us. She has plans, and they don't necessarily include me. But that's okay. Our meeting in Canada happened completely by chance. But it's a wonderful accident nonetheless. Emma Fisher. After a lovely 2 days spent in a hotel in St. Louis, we had to hit the road again. Our goal was Dakar, which was only 300 kilometers away. On the way out of town, our plans quickly changed. A big problem loomed ahead. A bus had overturned on the road in front of us. It seems that a scooter with a family of 5 and a propane tank on the side hit a huge pothole and flipped over in front of the bus. The bus swerved, but at that moment the driver hit the truck and it flipped on its side. After a momentary "oh shit," we pulled our bikes to the curb and took off our helmets. David ran to the front of the bus and started looking for the family on the scooter. What he discovered horrified most of us. The family had been thrown from the scooter and the father was pinned under the wreckage of the bus. The children were all bleeding and the mother was lying unconscious on the ground. The damn propane tank was jammed underneath her, as it appeared that she and the tank had flipped over several times. David quickly took care of the mother as she appeared to be the most injured. David started yelling for me to help with the kids and then for a few other people to go check to see if the father was alive or dead. I took our first aid kits off the bike and handed them to David. He was very calm and focused, tending to the mother and her children. The father was barely moving, and it was obvious that it was going to take a lot more strength than we could give him to get him out from under the fender of the bus. Finally, the police showed up, but they were doing almost nothing but directing traffic. David yelled for them to call an ambulance, but they looked at him like he had 2 heads. An ambulance? Here? There were thankfully only a few people on the bus, and they slowly made their way out with cuts and bumps. The bus driver was bleeding from a head wound. He would need several stitches. Finally, the police officers got moving and used an iron bar to try to lift the bus a little so that the father could be pulled out. When they pulled him out, he was in a bad way. David was preoccupied with him and kept asking if an ambulance was coming. Finally, two ambulances showed up, and the mother, father, and three children were loaded into the car and taken to the hospital. David and I sat on the curb drinking water. David was looking at the cuts and bruises the people on the bus had received. One of the police cars had taken the bus driver away, probably to the hospital. We didn't know for sure, but it wasn't our problem. One of the police officers, who had quite a few ranks under his belt, came over to talk to David. He spoke English pretty well. He asked David some questions, gesturing a lot with his hands and nodding. I couldn't hear what the conversation was about, but I soon found out. The policeman wanted to know why David was giving first aid to the wounded. When David explained that he was a doctor, the officer stepped back and spoke on his cell phone. He nodded his head for another long moment and then turned to David again and asked if he could follow him. The hospital asked that David stop and tell them a little about the injuries the family had sustained on the scooter. The hospital didn't seem to have a doctor at the moment, and all they had were a few nurses who were very busy at the moment. We got on our bikes and followed the police car to the hospital. It certainly wasn't the kind of hospital I was used to seeing in Europe, but it wasn't horrible either. The building was old and in need of updating, but it looked clean enough and there was no trash in the hallways. The nurse David spoke to waved her hands and said they didn't have the capacity to take on another patient. David looked around and found everything he needed to stitch up some cuts on the kids and then asked me to help him. I had no idea what to do, but he was very good at explaining to me what I needed to do to help him. Doing the stitches is very easy. The hardest part is getting the curved needle through the skin. Once you do it a couple times, it's no problem. I helped David for what seemed like a very long time, but I know it only lasted a couple hours. The sight of blood was unfamiliar to me, but it's amazing what you can do when you need it. David was amazing. I couldn't believe what he had done. I almost forgot that he was a doctor until he ran up to the scene of the accident and started shouting instructions to people. When danger arises, most people run from it. David ran towards it. Oh my goodness, we spent another 3 days in St. Louis. David spent most of that time at the hospital, where he saw several patients, both from the scooter and bus accident, and many others taken to the hospital. I learned from a nurse that rumors of a doctor seeing patients at the hospital spread quickly. This means that many of those who do not go to the doctor may get the opportunity to have their problem brought to their attention. The man worked for over 30 hours without a break. I went back to the hotel to get some rest and clean up. David needed another night to rest and get ready to hit the road. As we left the city, we were a little sad because we knew that now the people there would not have a regular doctor they could count on for help. David. Returning south brought new adventures. Our planned stop was Dakar. I had read a bit about it on Wikipedia and was eager to see the city. Dakar is the capital of the Republic of Senegal, home to about 4 million people. I was struck by the contrasts of the city. There was a lot of obvious wealth in the city, but there were also areas of rampant poverty. It seemed strange to see expensive Mercedes-Benzes and shabby scooters in the same traffic. But they seemed to coexist without much open hostility. People were busy surviving. Families had to be fed and housed, and for that you had to go to work. That was life. It was no different than any other place I'd seen since leaving Albany. It was just that now my eyes were open, and very much so. Perhaps I had Diana to thank for that. Perhaps her inability to keep her legs closed to other men was the impetus that allowed me to see a whole new world, one that had been foreign to me before. With each passing day, I understood more and more of what it was all about. With Emma as my guide and partner, I insisted we get a hotel on the beach. Up until now, we had shared the cost of the hotels and accommodations we stayed in. But I knew Emma was limited on funds. At least that was the impression I got from our conversations. So I told her that I needed a vacation after my experience in St. Louis. I had the money, and at that point I wasn't worried about the cost. So we stayed for 3 days, playing tourist and spending time at the beach. It was wonderful. Emma told me that traveling with me made her very happy. I told her that she was quietly saving my life by giving me a new life. But then reality intervened. I checked my email and got this from Chief Administrator, Albany General Hospital. To Dr. David Walters. David, we hope you enjoyed the vacation you spent at the hospital and that you are rested and ready to return to work. We have agreed on 3 months with the possibility of extending to 6 months, but only if we and you mutually agree. Unfortunately, I have to inform you that you must return here as soon as possible, but no later than the 1st of next month. Your colleague has fallen ill, so the emergency department needs you to return to work. I can cover the shortage of doctors for a few weeks, but suffice it to say that you must return here as soon as possible. Let me know if you have any problems and I will try to help. Call me when you get this, please. David, I'm sorry to disrupt your plans, but we really need you. So wherever you are, please get your ass home. Laura. Dr. Laura Johnson, Chief Administrator. Oh man, all good things come to an end sometime, and this adventure was another victim of reality rearing its ugly head and biting me in the ass. I decided I could ignore the email for a few days and continue the trip. So that's what I did. Emma Fisher. The journey south was going to be very difficult and, frankly, much more dangerous. Especially since David informed me that he had been told to return to the United States and go back to his job at the hospital. We talked about me going home to Germany when he needed to return home. Then I suggested we ride a little farther south to Namibia and ride from Windhoek to Cape Town. We contacted a bike store in Dakar that had contacts to ship our bikes by air and arranged to have them loaded on a cargo plane in 2 days. That's what we did. The flight to Windhoek was memorable because the plane was old and the pilot and co-pilot looked like nothing more than teenagers. The weather during the flight was very windy. We were glad to get down on the ground at the Windhoek airport and see our bikes. We sorted out our equipment, paid our handlers to make sure nothing was accidentally lost, and hit the road. The trip south to Cape Town took only 5 days. We both knew that the end of our time together was approaching fast, so we tried to make the most of that time. The sex with David was fantastic. I fell in love with him. He is the hero of my books. I didn't want to break up with my hero, but I needed to get back to work. And I needed to start writing the book and editing hundreds of hours of video. The publisher couldn't wait to see some progress, and the money they'd given me was running out. I needed to get home and take care of business there. David arranged for us both to fly to Frankfurt, and there we parted ways. He would fly to JFK Airport in New York, and I would take the train to Berlin. There was a direct train from the airport to Berlin, which takes about 5 hours. David planned to take the subway from JFK Airport to the city and then take the train from Penn Station to Albany. There, he would take a cab to the hotel. On the day of our last night, we turned in our bikes to the bike store. Mine was sent to storage and David's bike was sent back to the US. It was a sad day for me, and I could see that David didn't want to go home. At the Frankfurt airport, we were very quiet. I looked at him, and he looked so sad. His eyes spoke for themselves. I kissed him and told him he had to catch the next flight. He returned the kiss and whispered in my ear that he loved me. I realized that this was not the last time I would see this wonderful man. Albany, New York. Dave, Dave. That was my brother Paul yelling to me. I was standing in the hotel lobby looking around trying to figure out where he was. It was my second day back in the US after leaving Africa. Holy shit, bro. You're looking good. Where the hell have you been? Overseas. Hey, how did you know I was here? No, I have a client meeting here in a few minutes. Dad and Mom said you were taking a break from work and your wife. They didn't tell me or Marcy where you went. What the hell is going on with Diane? It's a long story. So tonight you're coming to my house for dinner and you're going to tell me what the hell is going on and what you've been up to. I didn't argue with him. Apparently it was time to get back to life here at home. Okay, thanks. A good home-cooked meal would be great. We chatted some more, and then I told him I had to go to the hospital to see my boss. Paul pulled out his cell phone and, I'm sure, called Marcy to tell her I was coming over for dinner. Next on his list would be Mom and Dad. I hadn't asked him not to call Diane, but I was sure he wouldn't. It was a short walk from the hotel to the hospital, and it was a beautiful morning. Oddly enough, on the way to the hospital, I passed the building where Diane worked. The hospital administrator, Dr. Johnson, was happy to see me and even told me that she had received a strange letter from the Senegalese government through the U.S. State Department, thanking me for the services rendered by an American doctor coming to St. Louis. She was very curious as to what this was all about, and I told her the story of the family on the scooter. father, mother, 3 children, and a propane tank. She thought it was all very strange. I guess the letter was their way of thanking me for my help at the hospital. And the ambulance chief brought me up to speed and then put me on a schedule. I'll start tomorrow and work 12-hour shifts for the next 6 days. That's great. Those 12-hour shifts easily turn into 18-hour shifts when there's a traffic accident or something like that. Tonight, I was going to visit my brother and his wife, eat all the food they put in front of me, play with their 3 kids, and maybe even have a beer or 3. I knew there would be a lot of questions, but I was ready. Marcy gave me a big hug as I walked through the front door and grabbed my coat. David, how are you? We've all missed you. Well, I'm fine, thanks for asking. The kids, after I handed them small gifts, went to play in the family room. Now let's get down to the serious business at hand. Marcy went straight to the main question. What the hell happened between you and Diane? Why did you leave? Gee, Marcy, it's good to see you too. I wouldn't mind a beer if you guys happen to have any in the fridge. Paul looked at Marcy as if to say, I told you so. He went to the kitchen and came back with 3 bottles of beer. I sipped from 1 bottle under the stares of my sister-in-law and brother. I began, so I guess you want to know what's going on with me. What did Mom and Dad tell you? Marcy looked at me with some disdain for my evasiveness. They haven't said anything. I even tried talking to Diane, but she won't say anything. She wanted information from me, and of course I had nothing. All we knew was that you took a break from work and went off on your own somewhere. So what the hell is going on? She put a fine point on the question. I spent the next half hour telling them about the last 5 months in Reader's Digest format. I even went into some of the finer points of what I knew Diane was doing. I spared them the details of the investigator's report that revealed the extent of her entertainment. I left out a lot of details they really didn't need to know. Besides, now that her affair had been revealed, it wouldn't bother them so much anymore. Never mind. We ate dinner and had another beer, and there were lots of questions about what I was doing on the road and especially in Africa. I shared a few stories about my travels. I told them about Emma. I also told them that she's back in Berlin, working, and I'm back in Albany, also working. So our lives would continue. After dinner, I told them I was going to look for a place to live for a while until I sorted out my divorce and figured out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. The trip with Emma had opened my eyes to life, and I didn't think I could go back to living in a hospital and pretending to be happy. Returning to Albany reminded me of the collapse of my marriage and how I had failed as a husband, how easily Diane had left me for any available guy. I didn't mention it to Paul and Marcy, but thinking about Diane made me feel like a total wimp. She had deceived me so easily and for so long. I resolved never to allow myself to do anything like that again. That was one of the many conclusions I came to while traveling on my motorcycle through Africa. Another conclusion was that there are many good women in the world, women with morals and integrity, women who will be honest with you and, if you don't suit them, will tell you so. Will talk to you, not just having fun behind your back. If Diana didn't want to be married to me, why the hell didn't she just say so and we could have gotten a divorce and moved on with our lives? But no, she had to hide what she wanted. She had to lie to me. I took an Uber back to the hotel and got a good night's sleep. Tomorrow, I was to look for a place to live. Diane. The person I work with informed me that David was back in town. They knew someone who was at the hospital and had seen him. I tried calling his mother and father, but predictably, I got the same response I'd gotten with every call since David left. Back off! I was desperate and decided to stake out the entrance to the emergency room in hopes of seeing him. I spent 4 nights parked outside the hospital in a spot from which I could watch the entrance. My goodness, how many people come and go, in and out of this place? I didn't realize how busy it was. It seemed like every night ambulances were constantly arriving here, bringing in the sick and injured. I got bored, so I took a book with me to read and a snack. Unfortunately, on the second night, I felt like going to the bathroom, so I got out of the car and went inside to find a restroom. I walked around until the security guard asked if I needed directions. I decided to just ask David. I was told that the doctors' names are withheld unless you have an appointment, in which case you have to go to the main entrance. I thanked him and left. On the 4th night, I got the gold. He was there. He was walking from the doctor's parking lot to the entrance. My heartbeat quickened. I almost jumped out of the car and called his name, but I was too late. He disappeared inside the building. I got what I came for. I knew he was back in town. My next step would be to try to talk to him and convince him to come home. David. It took a few days of searching, but I managed to find a nice apartment close to the hospital. It was a few blocks from where I was living. It was a pretty tiny one-bedroom apartment, but it was furnished, and all I had to do was buy linens and towels and stock up on food. I wanted a furnished apartment since I didn't want to buy furniture. I hadn't decided how long I was going to be here, so there was no point in buying a bunch of stuff that I would have to get rid of later. There was underground parking for my car, and I saw that the building had security, though no doorman. It didn't take me long to get back to work in the emergency room. Gunshot victims, accidents, and stabbings kept me busy on a daily basis. Heart attacks and strokes were common because Americans were obsessed with the concept of obesity. Why people want to be overweight? Africans are almost never obese because they have much better nutrition. They have to eat less, and they realize they have to be as healthy as they can be because medical care is so scarce. That's normal. All these ambulance clients and their insurance companies were paying my salary. 2 weeks after I returned to Albany, I called my attorney and asked for a meeting. 3 days later, she and I discussed the details of my divorce from Diane. There wasn't much property or money to divide, and I told her that Diane could keep all the things we had in the apartment we shared with her. I told Diane that when I left. Leanne had thought of everything ahead of time and had already prepared a petition for dissolution of marriage. I told her to go ahead. I was very surprised that Diane didn't initiate the divorce. I assumed that she was anxious to move on with her life and move away from me. After discussing the details, I left and went home to my apartment. Once there, I realized that my life outside of the hospital was going to be lonely. I needed a hobby. I called and found out that my motorcycle wouldn't be delivered to me for a few more months, so I decided to look for another one. I spent some time on the internet comparing motorcycles and decided to go look at a KTM. We have 2 stores outside of town that sell KTM motorcycles. I stopped by both on my day off, looked at what they had in stock, and settled on the 890 Adventure R. I had them bring in a few accessories to outfit the bike for long-distance riding: racks, extra headlights, a quick shift adapter, and a few other little things, all of which made the bike great for riding on both paved and dirt roads. It wasn't cheap, but what else could I spend my money on? Diane. I got home and there was a guy in a suit standing outside the house. As I approached the entrance, he looked at his phone and then asked me, "Diane Walters?" "Yes, who are you?" He handed me a large envelope. "You have been served." Before I could say anything, he stepped back and took a picture of me on his cell phone, holding the envelope, and then quickly turned around and walked to his car. Shit, I knew this was going to happen. David. So, a quick guide to New York State divorce law. You can file for a no-fault divorce in New York if you and your spouse have lived together for at least a year, or if the marriage has broken down irretrievably for at least 6 months. My attorney sent an email saying that Diane had been served with divorce papers. Leanne expected to hear back from Diane's attorney in a week or so. Until then, there was nothing that could be done. If Diane stalled, Leanne would file a petition with the court and get it granted in a year. So, in this case, Diane's prolonged affair means the irretrievable destruction of the marriage. If she objects to the divorce, then not living together for the last 6 months means we must live apart for another 6 months, in which case the requirements of the law will be met. Either way, the divorce will be final in about 6 months. Nice and easy. And then my doorbell rang. Diane. Okay, I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I followed David when he left the hospital at the end of his shift 2 days ago. I followed him to the apartment building where I believe he now lives. It's only a few blocks from our apartment. Well, mine, I guess. Now that I knew where he was, all I lacked was the courage to go to him. I waited a few more days to work up the courage to change into an outfit I knew David liked. He always told me I looked good. It was skinny jeans with high heels and a white sleeveless blouse. I put my hair up in a ponytail like he liked. Simple but elegant. If things went the way I wanted them to, the jeans and blouse could be taken off quickly. I went to the store and bought a beer I knew he liked. It was something called an IPA. I don't know what that means, but I know he likes or liked it. I also brought a bottle of white wine for myself, a California Chardonnay. Taking a deep breath, I pressed the call button for his apartment on the panel in the entryway. After a few rings, he answered, "Hi, David, is that you? Who is it?" "It's me, Diane, your wife." Silence. "May I come up?" Silence again. "I'd like to talk to you." Silence again. After what seemed like an eternity had passed, the buzzer sounded and I grabbed the door before he could change his mind. I took the elevator to his floor and, on unsteady legs, I walked to his apartment door. I knocked. "David." I wasn't surprised when the intercom informed me that someone was calling at my apartment. There are always people in apartments: girl guides selling cookies, Mormons selling Jesus and salvation, politicians selling getting elected or re-elected. But this was unexpected. It was probably a big mistake, but I let it in. When I heard a knock on the door, I waited a few seconds before opening it. I needed to take a deep breath and gather my thoughts and emotions. In the few minutes between her call and the knock, 100 thoughts ran through my head. They were questions I was asking and anger I wanted to vent. Before I opened the door, I reminded myself that I had moved on with my life. I am in a better place now than I was 6 months ago. I opened the door, and there she was. The look on her face was, well, she looked good. She looked tired, but good. The woman who was my wife, hell, she's still my wife now. She was just standing there outside the door. I opened the door all the way and invited her in. "Hi, Diane. What brings you here tonight?" "Hi, David. I wanted to talk to you. You've been hard to talk to lately and even harder to find you." I turned and walked down the short hallway to the kitchen. I saw that she had a bottle of wine in her shopping bag. I brought her a wine glass and set it on the counter. She handed me the bottle, and I was about to pull the cork, but I noticed it had a screw cap, so I opened it and poured her some. She pulled a can of IPA beer out of the bag and handed it to me over the counter. I wasn't sure if alcohol was good for me right now, so I told her, "No thanks, I'm on hospital duty tonight." I grabbed a glass with ice and poured a Diet Coke. I pointed to the table for us to sit down. I decided that what we needed to talk about would be better discussed at the table, rather than pretending like we were having friendly and informal conversations in the living room. Now was as good a time as any to finalize this marriage, and we could get busy signing the papers, and our lawyers could put the judge's stamp on them, and be done with it. "Diane." David got straight to the point. No tentative, "How are you?" or "It's good to see you after all these months." No, he looked more serious than I'd ever seen him. My stomach tied itself into a knot when I started. "You scared the hell out of me when you called the hotel and had Darren tell me you were dead." He didn't know who was calling, and of course he didn't recognize your voice. I was shocked when I got home and found your note and engagement ring. I pulled his gold wedding ring out of my bag and slowly placed it on the table. He just stared at it without touching it. He wasn't going to go near it. It was poison to him. "I tried to talk to your family, but none of them wanted to take the time to talk to me. Your father told me repeatedly to go to hell. I guess I deserved it." "Ever since you left, I've been in some kind of hell," David hastened to reply. "What did you expect me to do? I found out you've been having fun with Darren Ranger for a while now, and you thought I shouldn't do anything about it? What kind of idiot do you take me for?" "Never mind, I know what kind of idiot you think I am." "It wasn't like that." "How the hell was it?" "I was lonely. You were always at the hospital. You were never home. And when you were home, you were always exhausted, and you never had time for me. So it was okay to go out and have fun with another man? It was okay to ignore our marriage? It was okay. Why the hell couldn't you at least talk to me and tell me you wanted to end our marriage? Why deceive me for so long?" David stared at the table and refused to look at me. I couldn't blame him, could I? He sipped from his glass, then asked, "Have you signed the divorce papers?" "No, I don't want a divorce. I want us to be a complete family again. I'm still your wife, and I want to be your wife and the mother of your children." David laughed. "You've got to be kidding." It was a statement, not a question. "Are you completely delusional?" "No, I still love you very much. I'm still your wife, and I'm not going to do anything that would jeopardize that. I want you and me to live together again. I want us to be lovers again. I want to be the mother of your children." He looked at me wide-eyed. "Jesus, woman, you're delusional. I'm not going to be your husband a day longer than I have to be. My lawyer is ready to go to court and file for divorce without you. You know that in New York, it's enough for that if we've lived apart for a year or 6 months. If it's proven that our marriage is irretrievably broken, you've done a good job of making it irretrievably broken. Now I've done my part. It's over. Understand that. You started all of this by having fun with your girlfriend of almost 2 years. I'm just finishing up. Honey, what does it take to get over a divorce and become a couple again? I don't want to be married to you, Diane. You broke us. Now we're going our separate ways. I've had an amazing experience since leaving Albany, and I'm not going back to my old life. David, we can be good together, I know. No, we can't. You like spreading your legs too much in front of other men for there to be any kind of relationship between us. This water has been poisoned. It's time for us to move on, Diana. It's over. It's over. You can go back to doing what you like. David stood up to tell me our conversation was over. I finished the wine from my glass, set it on the floor, stood up, and walked towards him to kiss him. If he'll only let me touch him, maybe we have a chance. If he remembers what it was like for me to be around him, maybe he'll want me again. I walked over to him, took his hand, and pulled him to me. I kissed him on the lips. I stayed as close to him as I could until he pulled away. It was only a second, but I realized it was the beginning. The last thing he said to me was, "Don't forget to take this with you." He pointed to his wedding ring on the table. I took it, put it in my bag, and left his apartment. At that moment, I realized that it was over between us. David was done. He and I would never have a life together. I loved the man and cast him aside for something that wasn't worth the price I had to pay. Darren wasn't a prize, when you think about it. He got what he wanted, and all it cost me was a husband I didn't want to lose. I'm so stupid. I deserve what I got. I need to sign the papers and get it over with. I have to let him go. David, that crazy woman tried to kiss me as I was leaving the apartment. I don't want anything to do with her. Now she wants us to pretend like nothing happened so we can be a couple again and have kids. Uh-oh. She's not right in the head. That's not going to happen. The only thing that might happen, at least on my end, is that my lawyer will file the divorce and I can move on with my life. I needed a long, hot shower to wash the stink off me. So I did, and then had a beer. Emma Fisher. I've been very busy here in Berlin, editing hundreds of hours of video and putting it into context. The dubbing has been a challenge. I'm doing everything in English and a second version in German. Doing closed captioning is fun, but it's also a lot of work. Yet, the last month has flown by and I haven't noticed how time has flown by. I sent David a few emails with short videos and a few photos taken on his Honda while we were in Africa. He looks great in the videos, even on the one where he ditched his bike. We both laughed a lot. I asked my friend to help me. Her husband works for the government and has access to people's information. She was able to get me some information about David before we traveled to Africa together. You'll remember that I wanted to find out if he was really who he said he was, and not an imposter or serial killer. I was happy to hear that he was indeed who he said he was. So I asked Ingrid to ask her husband Nick if he could give me an update on David. I know it was a bit rude, but I needed to find out what was going on without asking David directly. I had my reasons for doing so. It took about a week, but she gave me what her husband was able to get. It seems David is back working in the emergency room and his lawyer has filed with the court for a dissolution of marriage, as it's called in America. That means divorce. The application was registered with the court a few weeks ago, so according to American divorce laws, he will be officially divorced very soon. That's good, because I have some big news for him. But before I tell him, I have a few other things to do. Business in America. I sincerely hope my news will please him. David. Yay, I'm divorced. It's official today. I have the paper in my hand. Thank goodness. Now I feel like I can move on with my life and do some of the things I want to do. First, I have a few things I need to address. Emma keeps calling and emailing me with news about her book and videos. She has sent me several videos, mostly of me doing stupid things like throwing my bike. Or I almost ran into a small herd of cows on the road because I was looking at the sights and not paying attention to what was ahead. The cows and the bike were not hurt, but my partner laughed a lot. I told her about what was going on in my life. We talked on the phone a few times. I told her about the visit Diane had paid me and how she hoped I would forgive, forget, and take her back. The disrespect with which Diane had treated me for so long was the deciding factor for me. I made my decision immediately after learning the extent of her affair. I felt like there was no turning back. That's what made me want to take a break from life. Emma listened to my rant, and I realized she was sick of my problems. She wanted to tell me something. She said she had to go, but she would email me in a day or so. Emma mentioned that she had an announcement for me in a couple weeks, but until then I would have to wait. I figured it was about her book. Emma. I need to tell David the news, but I'm not going to do it when he's still mad at his ex-wife. I need him to focus on me. Maybe a little more time. But not much more time. David, it's been a week since the divorce, and I'm at the Albany airport, where I'm to board a flight to O'Hare in Chicago, then Heathrow, and finally Berlin. The flight will take about 15 hours, and I will get there tomorrow around noon. I need to see Emma. It's been almost 2 months. I need to talk to her. I need to find out if there's anything left between us after our time together in Africa. If not, then I'll go back to my life and figure out what I want to do. Doctors Without Borders recruits for hospitals and is looking for doctors to work in different parts of the world. The pay isn't great, and I'll have to see how badly my family wants me to pay off the student loans they gave me, but I'll figure it all out somehow. I landed at Berlin-Brandenburg Airport, went through customs, picked up my bag at the carousel, and went outside to hail a cab. I booked a room at the Parkview Hotel, located in the very center of the city, in the Alexanderplatz district. It's a very nice hotel with all the modern amenities of an upscale hotel, not at all like the little rundown places Emma and I stayed at in Africa. After I checked in, showered, and grabbed a bite to eat, my task was to find the building where Emma worked. I knew it was in the center of town, but I had no idea how to get there. Of course, I turned to Google to figure out where to go. I saved a map of downtown and set out for a walk. By the time I got to her building, it was almost 4 in the afternoon. I decided that if Emma didn't want to visit me, I would play tourist for the rest of my flight home to the US. I tried to manage my own expectations about how I would react if I showed up on her doorstep unannounced, so to speak. Surprisingly, the building was only a few blocks away and the drive took about a 15-minute walk. I walked inside and found the company's office in the directory in the lobby. I took the elevator to the floor and stepped out into the lobby. I approached the very attractive young woman behind the counter. She greeted me in German. I smiled at her and asked if Emma Fisher was here and if I could see her. The young woman was surprised to see me. Her eyes opened wide, and her carefully sculpted eyebrows raised noticeably. The American woman was asking about Emma. She grabbed her cell phone and made a call. After a few seconds of very quick conversation, she looked at me and said, "Emma or someone else should be here in a minute. If you want, you can sit here and wait for her." She gestured to the soft leather chairs. When I sat down, she picked up the phone again and started talking. This time quietly, almost a whisper, but very quickly, in German, to whoever she was calling. I thought I heard the word American a couple times. She looked at me with the corners of her eyes. In the few minutes I sat there, several women who passed by looked me over from head to toe. I didn't realize what was going on. I was definitely under scrutiny. Do they really do this to every visitor? Are there really so few visitors here? Another very attractive woman approached me. Dr. Walters? I didn't have time to ponder. Yes. Follow me, please. It wasn't hard to follow her slender back, covered by a very tight short skirt, and the way her high-heeled shoes clicked on the polished granite floor. And then I realized that I had told the receptionist that I was David Walters, not Dr. Walters. I guess they know more about me than I realized. We walked down the hallways through the swanky glass and steel offices. Many women were casting glances at me. I wasn't sure if it was because I looked out of place or because my fly was unzipped. I discreetly checked it. It wasn't. Nor was there an announcement over the public address system about a strange American wandering the halls. After a long walk that seemed destined to end in the lobby, I saw Emma coming out from around the corner. A smile was shining on her face. She ran the last few steps to me, hugged me tightly, and kissed me on the lips. There were tons of people watching us. My God, David, when did you manage to get to Berlin? A few hours ago, I went to the hotel and cleaned myself up before coming here. I didn't want to show up here looking like a tramp. I figured if I did, the security people would throw me out on the street. I figured she would ask why I was here. That would let me know that we were back to acquaintance status. That the hot nights we'd spent together in Africa were behind us, shelved as beautiful memories, and our real lives were ahead of us, our own separate lives. Emma spoke and the audience watched and listened. She took my hand and we turned and headed to the editing room where she worked. She wanted to show me what she was doing with the video she had taken while traveling. Emma was wearing a very nice long and flowing black skirt, a long-sleeved white blouse and shoes with heels, but not as high as many of the other women. From their gait and appearance, you would have thought there was a fashion show going on. Her clothes were a far cry from the motorcycle gear I was used to seeing her in. And she was naked. The nudity was my favorite part. My best memories were split between being with a naked Emma and being able to see a part of the world that had been a mystery since I was a small child. I liked the naked part best, since I'm a man. I decided to just go with the flow and see how things went over the next few hours. We talked about her work on the book and the videos that will go into it. Some will be on YouTube and most will be on the publisher's website. People will pay for a subscription to watch them. Do you have time to have dinner with me? I'd love to know what's going on with you beyond your book. And I'd like to share some things with you about what's going on with me. How long can you stay? Well, I can stay for a few days. My return flight is in 3 days, but I can easily change it if I need to. What do you have in mind? I didn't know what Emma was getting at, whether she was asking me to stay longer or figuring out when she could get rid of me. I don't want to be like the leftovers of a fish dish. Get rid of it quickly so it doesn't stink. I'd had enough women who seemed to care about me, so I was on my guard. I want you to meet my family. I've told them a lot about you, and they are looking forward to meeting you. With that answer, you could have knocked me off my feet. Well, I guess I can do that. I need to eat first, and I'd really like to try some good German beer. I can leave and meet you after you finish work. No, you won't. I'm leaving now, along with you. We haven't seen each other in months, and I have important news after your news. As we walked out, people turned their heads to watch us pass by. Emma held on to my hand. We walked back to my hotel. On the way, I asked her where she lived. She said in an apartment nearby. I wondered briefly if she had a husband she hadn't told me about. The last thing I wanted was to be the other person. It would have been easy enough to withhold such information when we were traveling in Africa. But when she got home, things would get very fast and serious. Reality bites you in the ass very quickly. I realized that I didn't know as much about Emma as I wanted or needed to. I might want to meet her family. We got to the hotel and went into my room. Emma grabbed me, and we immediately started kissing with a heat that I hadn't felt in forever. Our clothes dissolved in a flurry of hand and foot movements. In another moment, we were naked on the bed. My mouth and hands were reacquainting themselves with a woman who was magic to me. She seemed familiar and new to me at the same time. I missed her touch without realizing it myself. For the past few months since returning to Albany, I'd been holding my breath and not even realizing it. Now I could breathe again. She seemed perfect to me. I couldn't believe that just a few days ago I'd been through a nightmare marriage and now I was already with a woman who made me feel human. I didn't want it to end. It was almost 9 o'clock when we dashed out to shower and eat. We didn't go far for food. The hotel had a good restaurant, and in Germany it's hard not to try good beer. Emma ordered a Diet Coke, which was odd because she likes beer. So why does your family want to meet me? I told them about you and our trips to Africa together. They really want to meet you since you came from the United States. I told them about my travels in Canada. My parents have traveled to the United States several times to visit my aunt in Florida. She lives there part of the year, I think, near Tampa. There are a lot of retired people there. The weather is nice there, especially if you have arthritis. Emma laughed. I think she has it, and she loves the beach. She took a sip of Coke. If you want, we can go to my parents' house tomorrow. We'll have to take the train. Will it take about 6 hours? Where do they live? In Ulm, in the south. My father worked as an engineer at Volkswagen. He designed production systems. I found it all very boring, but he could talk about it for hours. I'll let him tell you all about it. My mom is an accountant, but she's retired now, as is my dad. I'll call them and tell them we're here for a visit. I decided it was best to go with the flow, at least for now. The conversation turned to me. So you're now officially a free man? I smiled widely. Yes, I am, and I have the paperwork to prove it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a piece of paper folded several times. I placed it on the table. I'm a free man. Emma unfolded it and looked at it. I've never seen one of these before. Congratulations. How does it feel? Good. It was inevitable from the moment I found out she'd been having sex with her boyfriend of almost 2 years. She didn't want to be with me. If she had wanted to, she wouldn't have done what she did for as long as she did. I shrugged and sipped my beer. She asked, "What do you want to do now?" There was a definite motive in this woman's questions. She was dragging me several hundred miles to introduce me to her family. I was being tried to be evaluated. For months, there was the kind of intimacy between us that is characteristic of couples deeply committed to each other. I thought perhaps it was a German trait to quickly become sexually involved after getting to know each other. But no, it was something else entirely. I don't know until the end. I'm not sure how much longer I want to stay in Albany. They want me at the hospital and will pay me well, but there's too much history there and I need to find another part of the world to explore. You've instilled in me the urge to travel, you know? It's mostly your fault. I grinned at those words. Emma smiled back. We spent the night in my hotel room, and in the morning we went to Emma's apartment so she could pack. She made a few phone calls and then we took a cab to the train station. I like the trains in Europe. They run on time. They're easy to get to. And there's a lot less paranoid security than airports. We found our seats and settled into them. When we arrived in Ulm, we were met by a couple in their 60s, and I immediately noticed that Emma looked a lot like her mother. Same eyes and hair, but she had her father's smile. We met and went looking for her father's car, a Passat station wagon. In Europe, cars like that are called estates. Their house was old, but in great condition. The inside had been renovated not too long ago with all modern appliances and amenities. I complimented her father, Carl, telling him that my father was a builder and would have very much approved of the work he had done. Carl seemed to grow even taller at this compliment. I was offered a beer, and Emma went to get drinks for everyone as we sat down at the table. The looks I was getting just screamed, "Tell us about yourself." But they started with, "So, you're an American. Where in America?" I tried to exude as much charm as possible. They say that first impressions make a lasting impression. So I used all the manners my mother and father had taught me. Albany, New York. Just north of New York City, about 2.5 hours away. Many nodded in response. Thank goodness Emma came back with the drinks. Beer for Carl and me, red wine for her mother, and a glass of ice water for herself. I started connecting the dots. We sat in the living room, and as the silence became a little uncomfortable and her parents' eyes made laser holes in my head, I decided that if I wanted to survive the next hour, I needed to start a conversation. The best way to start a conversation is to ask people about themselves. So that's what I did. I knew they wanted to know everything about me, but I shifted my focus to them and used the little that Emma had told me to get them talking about me. It didn't take Carl long to start the conversation. He went on and on about the excellent quality of engineering in Volkswagens and the other wonderful cars they make. Emma's mother. Maria was much more humble. She worked for many years at a large accounting firm, doing mostly auditing. She retired when Carl retired and they planned to travel, especially to warmer climes when they were older. They want to buy a vacation home in Spain or Greece, somewhere on the water where it's warm in the winter. Germany is too cold for them in the winter. They deserve a vacation from the cold. They have friends who do the same so they can find a place to live nearby. They would see. It was like my own family, surprisingly similar. My parents bought a huge van with a big diesel engine, and they planned to see the country. They also wanted to spoil their grandchildren. I know they thought I would add to their numbers in addition to my brother and his brood, but it didn't work out. It did. A big dinner was being prepared in the kitchen. Carl continued his review of the benefits of German engineering and German beer, while Emma watched me closely and I watched her. Carl did not fail to inform me that he was the reason Emma was into motorcycles in the first place. He has owned motorcycles for most of his adult life and still has a BMW 1200 in his garage. He also has a smaller motorcycle for local trips, but the big BMW is for long-distance travel. Maria often rides with her husband, and they spend a few days at a time traveling. Not as long as they used to, but they still enjoy traveling long distances. Tomorrow, he will proudly show me his motorcycles. Tonight, we're having dinner. Say, I felt like I was being scrutinized to get some sort of stamp of approval. Almost like a job interview. What my goals in life are, where I see myself in 10 years, that sort of thing. I expected to be given a different bedroom from Emma's, but was a little surprised to find that Maria had put fresh towels for both of us in the same bedroom. When we got into bed, I figured there wouldn't be much intimacy and even left my underwear on as I got into bed. Why are you doing that? Emma asked, pointing at my boxers. Well, because we're at your parents' house and I don't think it would be right to get naked in their house. She laughed. They've slept together naked their whole lives. Take that off. I haven't been around you in months and I want you to be around me the whole time. I whispered in her ear. How long? Emma didn't move from her seat. How long? Yes, and for how long? How long for what? How many weeks? You do remember I'm a doctor, right? I know what a pregnant woman looks and acts like. I'm pretty sure you're pregnant. You're starting to show a little bump on your belly, so I'm guessing about 3, maybe 3.5 months. Oh my God. I counted and dotted the dots. The dots were saying, no, screaming at me. I'm going to be a father. No. The woman on the bed next to me smiled at me and got out of bed to get her bag. She pulled out a plastic test and held it out to me. 2 blue stripes. My world changed in an instant. I did the math and it turned out to be somewhere in St. Louis or maybe Dakar. About 3 months. I saw a doctor in Berlin about a month ago. I have an ultrasound appointment in a week. I was ready to accept that Emma and I would move on, but not as lovers, but as friends. I know what time and distance do to a relationship. What was once hot crazy cools down in the light of day and reality. But a big part of me wanted there to still be a bond between us that wasn't broken, that it would be reborn again. And it had. Just a minute. I slid off the bed, walked over to my bag and fumbled for something I'd brought with me. I took it just in case. I took it in my hand and went back to bed. Emma sat up. She was still naked. I opened the small box and took out the ring. Will you marry me? Her face immediately brightened and her eyes widened. Yes, yes, yes. I hugged Emma as tightly as I could until I remembered that there were probably more people who wanted to hear the news. I got up, dressed quickly, and opened the door to see 2 very surprised people standing in the hallway. We'll be right out. Emma quickly got dressed and we all went into the living room to share the news. Of course, Maria knew her daughter was pregnant. Mothers always know these things. Carl, surprisingly enough, was not upset to learn that his daughter was going to marry an American. What can I say? Emma. 2 days later, David and I returned to Berlin by train. We had a lot to do and I wanted him to be with me for a doctor's appointment for an ultrasound. David spent some time on the phone with the hospital where he works and, of course, his family to share our news. His mother and father cut through the noise of his brother, his wife, and their children. I heard words like, David is getting married to that German girl he spent all that time with in Africa. They were overjoyed at the news, and especially at the fact that I was pregnant. I was the next one to take a break, but told the publisher I would work from home on the book part and do as much video as possible. When we went in for the ultrasound, we were given some really shocking news. The doctor ran a wand across my abdomen to look for a heartbeat. It took a few seconds and David stared at the monitor. I saw the look on his face and then a smile. I knew immediately that everything was okay. My doctor made a few whirring noises and finally allowed us to listen to the heartbeat. But here we were in for a surprise. I heard David say, "Oh wow," and that surprised me. I had heard the machine make heartbeat sounds, but they were very fast. David looked at me. "We're having twins." The doctor smiled. I cried. "David." We were married in Berlin. Maria and Carl, a few of her friends, and a few people from the publishing house were present. About 30 people in all. It seems that the day I showed up at the office, the news spread through the women like wildfire that the American that Emma had talked so much about had arrived. They all had to actually see the doctor riding around on a motorcycle. A lot of decisions had to be made. We decided to go to Albany and find a place to live for the first time. That way we would be closer to my family, and we would have a place where Mary and Carl could come as often as they wanted. I talked to the hospital and agreed to a shorter shift cycle in exchange for a lower paycheck. That suited me just fine. I had a pregnant wife that I wanted to spend every spare minute with. The next few months were hectic. Emma had grown up. We found a nice four-bedroom house that would be a great place to raise children. It was only a short drive from my brother's house. Marcy and Emma were already busy decorating the house and planning what we would do when the family got bigger. My wife, Emma Maria Fisher Walters, gave birth to beautiful twin girls weighing almost 6 pounds each. Our life became constant feedings, dirty diapers, and more feedings. I forgot what sleep was. Maria and my mom have a fierce competition for the title of best grandmother. My dad and Carl are also competing to see who can outdo who in design and construction. They have grand plans to remodel and expand my house. I can't keep up with them, and I'm not going to try. David, just when you think life has kicked you in the nuts, something good comes out of it all. I lost my wife because of her need to have sex with other men. A woman I loved and thought she loved me. But she wasn't, and she lost respect for me and our marriage. She hid her infidelity from me for a long time, and eventually it meant the end of our marriage. I felt guilty, but she made the decision to date another man. I don't think she realized there were consequences to her actions. Meeting Emma was purely coincidental. If I hadn't gotten a flat tire in Newfoundland while eating ice cream, I may never have met her. And where would I be today? Who knows? But I do know that meeting her was the best thing that could have happened to me. I have a new life, a wonderful wife, 2 children, and a future to look forward to. This is the life I wanted. Emma. The last words went to me. Shortly after moving to America, I was walking with my sister-in-law, Marcy. We were shopping for children's furniture at an IKEA store. One woman was staring intently at Marcy. She obviously knew who she was. Marcy turned and addressed her. Hi, Diane. That was it. No, how are you? Short and to the point. I knew who Diane was, of course, but no one had ever shown me a picture of her. I knew she was David's ex-wife, the same one David had been having an affair with for a long time until David discovered it. Hi, Marcy. How are you? I turned around and my huge pregnant belly was in full view. I wanted to see what she looked like, and no wonder, she was pretty cute. Marcy looked at Diane and said in a tone that spoke for itself, Diane, this is Emma. She's David's wife. We're buying children's furniture. That left no doubt that she wanted Diana to know exactly what she was throwing away. She's having twins. With those words, Marcy turned, gently took my hand, and we walked away. Marcy said quietly under her breath, Whore? We picked up our purchases from the warehouse and helped Marcy and Paul load them into the truck. We had a snack and I got the full story from Marcy about Diane and how stupid she was. Much of this I already knew, but it was helpful to learn about it from a different perspective. The Davids family never talked about her. She was old news best forgotten. That night when David came home, we made love. I love being naked with him, and it always has the same effect on him. I dreamed of us riding motorcycles and traveling. I'm not sure that's going to happen anytime soon. David's father and mother have a huge motorhome, and they have offered to lend it to us if we want to travel with the little ones. The motorcycles will probably gather dust for now. I'm going to think about it. It could be a fun thing to do. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.